Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional and an author from New Jersey, USA, Mr. Pete Sacco. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show this morning.
Thank you. Pete is an entrepreneur, a technologist, and a modern day mystic. He's the founder and CEO of PTS Data Center Solutions, and he's an author of a book titled Living in Bliss. So, Pete, my first question for you, before the titles and ventures, who were you as a young person, and what early influences shaped your worldview?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you. It's mom and dad as usual, right? Or, as is typical. My dad, when I grew up, was a bit of a small business entrepreneur. He owned a mortgage company. I was married young the very first time. I was 27 years old. And so my father-in-law, which was very influential in my life, was also an entrepreneur. He owned a trucking company. So between the two of them, I was kind of born into it. I've come to learn that we're really an amalgam of the things we do best. And I'd say that those two early influences were what enabled me to have the faith in myself to go out and branch out and do other things. Another little joke I like to say is that I'm 58 years old now. I was born in 1967, and I feel like I'm at a time when I should be slowing down. Most of my tennis buddies are, but I feel like I was born for this moment, and that AI is a thing. I design and build data centers, and so that's who thought I'd be playing with the cool kids again at the ripe old age of 58. But I like to say that my love of technology started seeing the movie Star Wars. I feel like George Lucas made it for me, right? And so that was the influential. So between the entrepreneurial spirit and the technology, I think that's how it was
How
born.
amazing. But I must mention to you that at 58, you're very young. I'm 69 and still enjoying every possible day that I can. Do
It's
different
really
sorts
the
of different
secret,
things.
isn't it? To have purpose and to feel a
Correct.
kinship to what we do. It's
Correct.
Dan Buettner said it best from the documentarian who did the Blue Zones, that we need purpose and we need community in order
Absolutely.
to thrive.
Absolutely. Well said. Pete, was there a defining moment or a mentor who propelled you into entrepreneurship path other than your ex-father-in-law and
Yeah,
your father?
my father and my father-in-law were probably the most influential, but I think it was General McChrystal that said growing up, you need to have a couple different mentor-mentee relationships. You
Yeah.
need people above you that you aspire to do. And
Mm.
there have been many across both the data center side, Dr. Bob Sullivan, very early influencers in there. People like Ray Kurzweil, one of the first real, and George Gilder guys that were futurists. I fancy myself a bit of a person who can somewhat see visions of the future of where we're going from a technology standpoint. So I tip a nod to them. But then also in the latter part of my life now, perhaps late to discover my own spirituality, there's been all of the ancient mystics
Mm.
that today, it's interesting because I have a quantum physics background, which turned to engineering, but we're seeing a connection today between the teachings of the ancient mystics and masters with the quantum science of the day.
Mm.
And now that AI is going to deliver to us at our own bidding
Yeah.
perfect analytical intelligence,
Mm.
I think that we're going to discover our own discernment and judgment in there is
Mm.
enhanced to balance that out on the polar the polar opposites of human intelligence. And
Mm.
so I find it interesting that here I am, this guy who is immersed in technology of the day, but also has had certain realizations about human consciousness and spirituality. And
Mm.
so it's funny, I just finished self-publishing my second book called The Bridge, which
Mhm.
explores that connection between perfect analytic intelligence and human consciousness discerning and judging
How interesting.
intelligence.
How interesting. Well, good luck with your book.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Pete, you founded PTS Data Solutions in 1998. What
Yes.
problem did you set out to solve?
At the time, I came from a background, I mentioned quantum led to engineering, and I studied engineering, and I specifically was in power electronics, and I designed power supplies and DC to DC converters
Mm.
during a time when we were immersed in the first two Gulf Wars. But that led to UPS design, uninterruptible power
Yeah,
supplies. And at that time, data centers were coming out of the mainframe generation
correct.
where hardware was the order of the day. It was
Mm.
IBM centric. It was highly centralized, right? And I was, my formative relationship was during the time of Microsoft, the decentralization, if you will, of
Mm.
compute,
Mm.
right? Because it was the software generation,
Mm.
right? But then as I became a professional in the data center industry and my company grew and thrived over the years, we've seen ourselves migrate back to centralization in the form of public cloud.
Mm.
The interesting thing, if the product before was hardware and then later on it was software, the product was interesting in the evolution, and then the product under the centralized cloud platform is really us.
Mm.
We've given away what our intentions are and what our somewhat our security, and we became the product. I
Mm.
do believe, Ashtosh, that this is the formative time when we are going to migrate back
Mm.
to a decentralization.
Correct.
And so I think we're already seeing underpinnings of that in the world already.
Very interesting. You've also been at the cutting edge of AI HPC ready data centers.
Yes.
How do you see AI infrastructure evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I'm pretty well known at this point for giving this little talk or this little piece. If AI was a clock, a
Mm.
24-hour clock, we're only at 2 a.m.
Okay.
We've got 22 hours left to
Mm.
go for us to fully realize AI. And by noon, halfway through the clock, we will not recognize the world.
Mm.
And that's a bold statement.
Yeah.
But this is the most formative technology that mankind has ever evolved.
Hmm.
And it's actually no surprise that we've done that because throughout history, we have been our own calculating tool, right? Man has been his own calculator, if you
Mm.
will.
Correct.
So it was no mystery that we evolved the calculator, later on the computer, right? Now, all of a sudden, AI,
Yeah.
the perfect computational and analytical machine.
Mm.
And throughout history, though, every generation has been defined by the technology that it shaped,
Mm.
right? Way back to Gutenberg's printing press, right?
Yeah.
Remember, we weren't around, but at the time, the dissemination of knowledge was going to spread heresy and chaos, but it
Correct.
didn't. It ushered in enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. It was supposed to steal jobs, but
Yeah.
it didn't. And television was going to rot our brain, but it didn't. In every
Mm.
case, we looked at it with fear, just like we're looking at AI right now
Mm.
with fear.
Mm.
But if we choose to look at it with wisdom and courage, we're going to find that this technology is no different. That this technology, well, is different, and that this might be the final technology that allows the human species to thrive with
Mm.
true abundance and live in true post-scarcity world. But
Mm.
it's going to be a roadmap there.
Well
I
said.
think 2026, just to stop here, I think 2026 will be the year of the agentic AI system
Correct.
where rote processes are handled by the machines,
Mm.
right? And yes, it's going to create some pretty dystopic times because the unskilled worker is going to be the first person replaced
Mm.
because things that have order and structure and defined parameters are going to be the first things that we're going to be able to do. The
Mm.
real hard one for the human species is going to be the advent of robotics in the 2030s
Very well
because
said.
that's going to replace human
Yeah.
labor
Yeah.
outright.
Yeah. Very well said. I loved your example of we are at still 2 a.m. and by the time we get to 12 noon, the world will be different. But you also have a powerful line, which is, and to quote you, AI is a mirror calling us to reclaim the sacred.
Yeah,
What do you mean by this?
sure. I think I want to put it in context. I hear so often, first of
Hmm.
all, Ashtosh, as we get to know each other, you're going to learn that I'm the anti-Terminator guy, right? In
Hmm.
America here, we had the Terminator movies and
Yeah.
I, Robot, and all of them have the same thing that the robots are going to take over the world.
Hmm.
I couldn't be further from that thought process
Hmm.
here. Let me explain.
Hmm.
As I have adopted AI in my personal life, in my professional life, I have learned it hasn't made me a little bit better. It has
Hmm.
made me massively better.
Hmm.
I learn faster.
Hmm.
I can educate better.
Hmm.
I have a fleet of PhDs at my beck and call to help me work through issues and ideas and everything. So it is not done. It is by far not replaced. Remember
Hmm.
when we went to school and they said you can't have a calculator because you're going to forget how to do long
Correct.
division? Well,
Correct.
there's no way that happened. Well,
Yeah.
AI is no different. It's
Hmm.
enhancing us. What I mean by the mirror is that if we allow AI to do the things that perhaps we were never needed to do, the
Hmm.
calculating, the analytics, the optimization, because we have created the perfect engine to do that,
Hmm.
it is going to force, it is not even going to be a choice. It is going to force humanity to level set perfect analytical engine with the things that mankind was always meant to do. And
Hmm.
that meant to do to me is discernment, the idea of casting judgments, opinions, and ideas, and to create in
Hmm.
the absence of perfect data.
Hmm.
The machines will never do that
Hmm.
because they don't have a soul. They're not a part of consciousness itself. I like to believe that, by the way,
Hmm.
that consciousness is fundamental to the universe, not time
Absolutely.
and space, but that's a whole separate discussion. But
Absolutely.
if
But
that's the case,
yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
I was
but
just going to say, if
go
there's
ahead, please.
perfect intelligence, it's our job to tap into that.
Absolutely.
AI will be the mirror that allows us to recognize that our role in the universe is to be selfless and altruistic with one another,
Hmm.
and it will be the catalyst that drives the polar opposites of intelligence, perfect analytics versus perfect discernment.
Well said. But therefore, a follow-up question for you is that given all this technology, how can leaders determine what to delegate to machines and what to remain clearly human?
Yeah, that is going to be the great experiment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to, which is reason why I say, and such great minds right now have such wise cautionary tales about how we need to make sure that we're looking at this with wisdom in the right
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
Because it requires us, like I said, to become discerning engines. Well,
Hmm.
we're not quite geared for that
Hmm.
exercise right now, right?
Right.
We've identified ourselves as what we do, how smart we think we are,
Hmm.
and how much skills we have, and how saleable that is in the workforce.
Right.
I would say for CEOs, the first thing that I'm trying to do is anything that is a rote process
Hmm.
in 2026 will be the things that I will try to get the machines to do the rote process. So
Hmm.
I'm looking across my boards at things like not just the sales and marketing, that was the easy first one. But how about accounting? How
Hmm.
about the process of processing purchase orders or processing invoices or processing their, right? That requires precision. It requires studiousness. It requires the same process over and over. Those are the types of things that AI can
Hmm.
dig into the process and understand when I'm off the rails and get back on the rails.
Hmm.
That will be the first things.
Very
I do have an
interesting.
opinion, by the way, that when the robots come, where that's going to be adopted by humankind.
Hmm.
And I think in the robots, the first jobs that CEOs will choose for the robots
Hmm.
will be the jobs that human beings shouldn't even be doing in the
Correct.
first place.
Absolutely right.
Dangerous material
Yeah.
handlings, dangerous environments, things like that. The
Hmm.
problem is it's going to very quickly be a much better instrument for
Mm.
picking things up and putting things down. And I'm going to
Yeah.
use that ubiquitously across a whole bunch of jobs that
Correct.
are rote-based jobs.
Yeah.
But the one that I think where the rubber is going to hit the road for humanity is going to
Mm.
be in nursing.
Mm.
You know, it was Brett Adcock, the founder of Figure AI, the other robot company. Everybody knows Elon Musk, right? But
Mm.
Figure probably builds some of the world's most advanced robots. And in his pitch deck, he mentioned that there's 400 million people that
Mm.
are going to require some form of elder care,
Yeah.
nursing,
Mm.
and there are not enough nurses on the
Correct.
planet to
Correct.
provide that. So
Correct.
imagine this. Anybody who's ever taken care of a loved one that has had dementia or, or heaven forbid, Alzheimer's knows it is difficult to build the compassion that is required to take care of that loved one.
Absolutely.
In fact, it
Absolutely.
supplants being with that loved one for the act of caring. Well,
Correct.
imagine a scenario where that robot keeps grandma safe, medicated, well protected, and answers all her questions with nothing but pure compassion.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
going to give us back the sacred, the
Hmm.
space in which to spend time and be selfless and altruistic with grandma or
Hmm.
mom or
Hmm.
dad or auntie or whomever that is in our life that we
Absolutely.
need to spend time with.
Great
And
response.
we're going to love that robot for that role. And I believe that will be the swinging pendulum time when we realize that we need to identify this differently. Yes, it's not human, but it is no less important to our world.
Great response. Let's now move from technology to another aspect of you, which is, burnout and ego. You've
Yeah.
spoken openly about burnout and ego-driven success. What was the turning point that shifted you inward?
You know, there was a time I talk about in Living in Bliss, the book over my shoulder,
Mm.
which really was a cathartic tale. I think I wrote it more for me just to get it down on paper
Mm.
because I felt like, how could I have had this much success this early in my life?
Mm.
If measured in terms of the things that I thought were
Yeah.
important to the world,
Mm.
money, all of the trappings of life. But how could I also be this miserable? How come I could feel unfulfilled
Yeah.
yet have all the things that people say that you're supposed to have? And I
Mm.
literally woke up one day. I hadn't been feeling well, and I went to the doctor. And you have to remember, it wasn't 30 years ago, the guy you're looking at now. I was 360 pounds,
Mhm.
unhappily married, estranged from my son, and here I was not feeling good. And the doctor then pushed all the medication across the table and said, "Congratulations, Peter, you've joined the ranks of the unhealthy. Keep it up. You won't live as long as your grandparents."
Mm.
And so that created something in me. It's
Mm.
unfortunate that in humankind, we need to hit our low often before we do something.
How true.
Since that time, I've created the idea of commit, learn, and do. I committed in that moment that I needed to do something in my life that was going to be different. And I happened to go
Mm.
down my parents and I said, one, I'm going to get healthy because if I don't have that, what do I have? Two, I'm going to get divorced. Three, I'm going to get remarried and have children with that person. And no, I don't know who that is yet.
Mm.
And four, I'm going to discover what is this thing called happiness? Why
Mm.
is it elusive to me? And if I
Yeah.
discover it, I'm going to make it my mission to teach it to other people.
How
Well,
interesting.
it's taken 30 years and it's a perpetual journey, and I'm hardly done yet.
Mm.
But the book first talks about how fixing the body, relatively
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
You're good to the body will be good to you. The mind, a
Mm.
little bit more challenging. Spirituality was a surprise discovery along the way.
Mm. So, therefore, your response is a great segue to my next question, which is about your book. Your book, Living in Bliss, suggests an integration of mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah.
What does bliss mean in practical day to day life?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I think the moments when I was searching for this idea of bliss was in those days early on, it was just fulfillment and happiness. And I
Mm.
stumbled across a book by an author, Jonathan Haidt. And Jonathan he's a psychologist, and he wrote a book called The Happiness Hypothesis. And to that point, I had also been kind of a a student of the CEO, right? I've been a CEO for 30 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
And, Dan Sullivan, the very well accomplished, business consultant, who wrote a book called Who Not How, where he
Mm-hmm.
talks about you need to identify what your strengths are. And that resonated with me because Jonathan Haidt said that we all have an equation for happiness. We are a set point for our happiness, plus the conditions in which we find ourselves, plus the voluntary acts that you can give yourself every day. I realized in that moment that if I align the voluntary acts of the things that I can do for myself every day with those things that I'm already good and strong at,
Mm-hmm.
then I can give myself bouts of happiness throughout the day. And I identified the things that I'm strong at: being a visionary, being a storyteller, motivating others, being able to have the space to deeply concentrate and to
Mm-hmm.
facilitate the ability to make things easier and comprehensible to those I love. So
Mm-hmm.
I give myself the gift of happiness by doing those every day. But I
Mm-hmm.
added two more to Jonathan's equations. One, I want to manifest or create moments of awe and wonder. I don't want to walk in nature and discover awe. I
Mm-hmm.
want to put myself in nature and put myself into experiences where I create awe because
Mm-hmm.
it lifts the spirit and heals us as human beings.
Yeah.
But the hard one, I'm going to tip to Buddha. If all of those are additive, the hard one is minus expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And what I discovered is I expect way too much of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I expect way too much that the world is going to beat a path to the way I think it should operate. And worse, I expect way too much of those around me,
Mm-hmm.
especially those that I love. I put an undue burden on them. And so I've had to learn how to live with less expectations in
Mm-hmm.
order to reduce suffering.
Fascinating. I have time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
What are the habits or practices that ground you and help you maintain that balance?
I love that question because I'm a work in progress. I could tell
Mm-hmm.
you that I've learned genetically, I am predisposed to sympathetic nervous action,
Mm-hmm.
right? My default is to be, right brained, high functioning,
Mm-hmm.
on point at all given moments, constantly in a vigilant state, which is great if you're a CEO and a businessman and high functioning.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible when I'm trying to go to sleep at night or trying to find compassion. And so, where I work on is how do I create habits that enable me to switch from a sympathetic activation, right? Sympathetic nervous system, high heart rate, low HRV, actually responsive to
Mm-hmm.
everything. Fear, flight, and freeze, flight, free, right? The fears.
Mm-hmm.
How do I be parasympathetically activated? So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the things that I do, from the supplements that I take to the therapies I do, like cold plunging and tapping and things like that, are all to teach my body that we do not need to remain in this hyper vigilant
Correct.
state all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because true creativity, true intuitiveness, true connection with consciousness happens during flow state,
Mm-hmm.
parasympathetic thought, not during sympathetic. That's when we're calculating, that's when we're cogitating, that's when we're making sure that we're going to survive. And so that's a learned response for me because I am genetically programmed for sympathetic action. And so I've had to teach myself how to slow down, how to surrender. So people like Michael Singer's books, right? Untethered Living,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the guys that are the true modern day mystics, right? That are talking about Sam Harris,
Mm-hmm.
Eckhart Tolle, right? Are the guys that are talking about that we need to detach, we need to surrender ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The therapies can get me so
Yeah.
far. It has to be an internal release.
Amazing. And Pete, my last question for you. If humanity is standing at a crossroads today, what is the one inner shift you believe could change everything?
Well, I think I've touched on it already. I think that one we can do a lot for ourselves by recognizing that there is very little. You know what? Being an old dad, I'm happy to say that the little girls over my shoulder, those are not my grandchildren, right? That's family 2.0. I have 8, 6, and 3-year-old little girls, and
Oh,
then I have
wonderful.
thank you. And then I have, 12, 10, and 2-year-old grandchildren at the
Hmm.
same time. And what I realized as an engineer is you want to engineer them. I want to build them.
Hmm.
But what I've discovered in the little bit of wisdom I've amassed in this life is that I can't engineer or derive anything. What
Hmm.
I can do is shepherd the loved ones of my life through life
Hmm.
by being the best possible person that I can be,
Hmm.
rooted in humility, rooted in selflessness, and a desire to leave this place better from whence I found it.
Hmm.
And if I can do that and elevate myself, could it potentially elevate those around me?
Hmm.
And that's the best we can do for each
Absolutely.
other, is
Absolutely.
be the best person that you can be
Hmm.
in the hopes that it elevates the collective.
Very well
And
said.
so, if there's any message, that would be the one message.
Hmm.
The AI is going to force us into that role by
Hmm.
recognizing that's always what our purpose was. Remember the ancient mystics, they never say we have to do anything,
Hmm.
we have to remember from whence we came. And
Hmm.
I believe that is going to be the capturing of the sacred, is remembering that we were never meant to do.
Correct. And on that note, Pete, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this one has been. And as I was hearing you speak, I was listening to, on the one end, tremendous amount of understanding of technology and AI, and on the other side, the amazing amount of wisdom that you have drawn out of life. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own entrepreneurial journey, about burnout and ego, about artificial intelligence, which you say is a mirror calling us to remain sacred. You also talked to us about your book and so many different aspects of life. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed our time together. I
Yeah.
really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.